Welcome to another episode of Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast, where certified financial planner Lauren Sherman shares thoughts on having a healthy mind, body, and spirit, an abundance of wealth inside portfolios and out, and lessons learned from clients and mentors over the years.
Welcome into our show for another Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. Of course, I am your host, Lauren Sherman, and for this episode, I had a very special guest join the show, Gary Zimmerman. Gary is the founder and CEO of a company called MaxMyInterest, which has a mission of helping you earn more while keeping your cash safe. Gary graduated magna cum laude from Harvard University with a degree in economics and then completed an executive education program at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. You could say the timing of this conversation with Gary and the services MaxMyInterest provides could not have been more relevant, as we unknowingly had this conversation less than a week before the historic failure of Silicon Valley Bank, which, of course, we hadn't seen this in the banking industry since the financial crisis back in 2008. This is a little foreshadowing, but Gary's story and the birth of MaxMyInterest fits right in with what we are experiencing today in 2023. I'm excited to share this conversation with you as Gary will explain how he came up with the idea for MaxMyInterest. We will also talk about how this works in practice, and most importantly, how you can take action to make Max work for you. This episode is absolutely packed with great information and a couple of actionable steps that you can take on your own. So with that, let's jump right in. So without further ado, Gary Zimmerman, welcome in, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we dive into the nuts and bolts of how this works, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself first?
Sure. I'd be happy to, Lauren. So I was born and raised in Canada and then moved to the U.S. for college, and that stuck. So I've been here ever since. And it's kind of funny. I entered college as a biochemistry major. I thought that I wanted to do medical research. But freshman year, I took an economics course, and it just really resonated with me. I sort of realized this is the way my brain works. And so many of the questions that I had growing up were answered by this field. And so I switched my major to economics and ended up starting my career as an investment banker and spent the first 15 years of my career advising corporations and financial sponsors and sovereign wealth funds until sort of one fateful day in the middle of the financial crisis when the idea for Max dawned on me.
Well, and that's a perfect transition because I love to begin each episode with a quick story. So how about we start there? Do you mind sharing the story of how you came up with the idea for MaxMyInterest?
Sure, absolutely. So I was working at one of the big four banks, and I was stationed overseas in Tokyo as an expat, advising companies on overseas transactions. And the financial crisis arrived, and many of you may remember it was a fairly tumultuous period in our history, and banks were failing left and right. And the bank where I worked was one of the four largest banks in the country. And all of a sudden, I found myself looking at their stock price, and it had fallen from $55 a share down to 97 cents. And it struck me that, gee, maybe this bank might not survive until tomorrow. And so I looked at my balance I was keeping in the bank, and it was fairly large because I had sold my house before I moved abroad. And I was sort of saving that money to be able to buy a new house when I moved back home. And I thought, gee, if this bank were to fail tomorrow, every dollar that's above the FDIC limit could be gone. Because as I think your listeners probably know, the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, insures deposits at banks, but only up to certain limits. And so I said, gee, I need a better solution for my cash, and I need it today. And at the time, the bank had pitched me what in the industry we call brokered deposit solutions. But you've probably seen them pitched. If you used to have an account at like a brokerage firm or something, they would say, oh, don't worry, you can keep all of your money here. It'll be fully insured. But being a little bit nerdy, I dug into it and I looked under the hood. And what I found is that those solutions are not as safe as they promise, that actually you don't know where your money is. Those deposits might be overlapping with other accounts you have. And so you might not be fully insured. And more importantly to me, if the bank that sort of originates that process for you were to fail, you lose access to all of your money until the resolution process is complete. And that was exactly what I was concerned about. I hold cash for safety and liquidity. And here I was in a situation where that cash might not be safe and it might not be liquid. So I was looking for a better way to manage cash. And the simplest thing I could think of was simply to open more bank accounts directly in my own name, directly at banks. The problem is that I was in Japan at the time, so I couldn't just walk around the corner and, walk into a branch and open up new accounts. And so I went online. And what I found online were the online banks. And today those are pretty popular. Everyone's, I think, pretty familiar with them. But back then it was a fairly new concept that you could deposit money in a bank without physically going into a branch. And there were two neat things about the online banks to me. The first was that you could open an account online in just a few minutes. So it was a lot faster and simpler. I didn't have to walk into a branch and wait for someone to come out with a clipboard and ask me a zillion questions and try to cross-sell me 3 credit cards. I could just open the account. And so that was nice. But the other thing is that the online banks, because they don't have physical branches, they have much lower operating costs. And so they're able to pay higher yield. And so by opening a bunch of accounts at multiple online banks, I was able to spread my cash out across multiple banks so that it was all fully insured. It was all liquid and there was no single point of failure because even if one bank were to fail, I could still access my money at the other banks. And as a sort of side benefit, I also picked up higher yield as well.
Yeah. So this really was born out of a personal need before it became anything for other people to be using. It sounds like that's where it originated.
Absolutely. And in fact, it didn't occur to me at the time that it might be a company. This was just my own kind of nerdy way of managing cash, because what I found is that as time elapsed, the banks started changing their rates, and the bank that used to have the highest rate no longer had the highest rate. And I thought to myself, well, gee, these deposits are really commodities, right? An FDIC insured bank account is an FDIC insured bank account. It's backed by the full faith and credit of the US government. And so I started sort of manually moving my money from bank to bank so that I made sure I was always earning the highest yield. Fast forward 3.5 years of doing this once a month, logging into my accounts, checking the balances, moving funds around. I got tired of doing it and I was about to stop. And I looked back and I realized I had earned an extra $40,000 a year of interest income. And I thought, well, gee, that's kind of nothing to sneeze at. I don't really want to spend my time doing this anymore, but I also don't want to give up all that incremental earning opportunity. And so I started to think about whether we might be able to use technology to automate this process so that I could continue to manage my bank accounts, but with much less effort. And around that time, it occurred to me that I was not the only person with this problem, that a lot of people had this problem. A lot of people were holding a lot of cash and they were sort of agnostic about what it was earning. But if they thought a little bit more carefully about it, they'd realize they could be earning an awful lot more. And so we started doing some market research, and what we found was that the top 4% of the population, which is basically anyone with $1 million of investable assets or more, those households, there are about 6 to 8 million households in the country with that level of assets. It's pretty rarefied air, but among those households, collectively, they were holding $4.5 trillion of cash, and almost all of that cash was sitting in the wrong place, both under earning and underinsured. And so the idea was, if we could figure out a way to create software that was safe, secure, scalable, private, that we could enable more people to take advantage of the same strategy that I'd been pursuing. And here we are 10 years later, and it works. It really works.
Right. So fast forward from your own personal use to a decade later, can you dive into a little bit more, maybe still somewhat of a 10,000-foot view in layman's terms of how the platform MaxMyInterest actually works?
Sure, absolutely. So in simplest form, most people have a checking account and they have a savings account. And the checking account, you usually pick that bank pretty carefully, right? Either they have a branch that's close to you, or the teller is friendly, or they have your mortgage, or, that's where your direct deposit goes. So that relationship that you have with your bank and your checking account is very sticky, right? You're probably never going to switch banks. And most people don't switch banks. So that makes perfect sense. But the savings account piece is a pure commodity. In the same way that, you pick your car very carefully, but when it comes to the gasoline that you put in your car, that that's a commodity, and you can go to Shell or BP or Exxon, whoever offers the best price on the gas, that's where you're going to get the gas to fill up the car. But the car itself, you have a really close relationship to. So we've sort of thought about bank accounts the same way, which is to say, you probably love your bank, and that's fine. You should keep your checking account wherever you want to keep it. But for the savings piece, you should be willing to shop around in the same way that you shop around for gas for your car. And it's not a one-time decision because the banks are changing their rates, just like the gas stations change their prices for gas all the time. And so what we built is a platform that basically enables you to take your existing brick and mortar checking account, link it to our platform, and then we help you open multiple high yield online savings accounts. And we do it through a process that we call the Max Common application. So basically you fill out one form and you can open up multiple accounts at once in about 3 minutes.
So from the account owner standpoint, they feel like they're opening one account instead of several.
Well, they're opening several accounts, but you can manage them all through the same interface. So you don't need to have separate logins and passwords. But under the hood, you own each of those accounts and you have direct, full control over all your money. And you could go to any of the banks and pick up the phone and call them and wire funds out same day. So it's your own money in your own accounts. The way we often visualize this, if you think about a bicycle wheel, is we often call it a hub and spoke system. So the hub is the sort of center. That's your checking account. That's the center of your financial relationship. And then the spokes are basically links out to these higher yielding online savings accounts. And so when you join Max, you say, great, I'm going to bring my Wells Fargo account with me. That'll be my hub. We help you open up 3 or 4 or 5 high yield savings accounts. And that way those banks can compete against one another for your deposits. And you simply tell our software how much money you want to keep in that Wells Fargo checking account. And everything above that will then flow out along these spokes to your higher yielding savings accounts. And by structuring it that way, what we're able to do is help you manage your money so that it's always always reallocates to whichever of your banks are willing to pay you the highest rate in any given month.
Yeah, it's really protecting people from a bank giving a quote unquote starter rate where they have a really high rate and then they have your funds and then they drop it drastically later.
That's right. There are no teaser rates on the Max platform. But frankly, even if a bank did do that, it doesn't matter because the Max would help you reallocate your funds to another bank that's willing to pay you higher yield. So the whole focus is make sure the customer is always earning as much yield as possible while making sure that their funds are also fully FDIC insured. And that's really important.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So why should retirees in particular be thinking about their cash?
Because inflation is terrifying, right? If you think about it, inflation is effectively the government taking away your money. Now that sounds very drastic, but when the government prints more money, they're devaluing your existing money. And as a retiree, that can be really scary because you've done all sorts of planning. You've worked with an advisor, you've prepared for the future, and now the future is changing. And you thought that you were going to be able to take your grandchild out for a slice of pizza and it was going to cost $2 and now it costs $4. And now either you can take them half as often or for share a slice of pizza, it just changes behavior. And so it's really important that your cash keep pace with inflation as best it can. So to put it in perspective, today, according to the FDIC, the average rate paid on a savings account across all the banks in the country is 0.35%. So it's a third of 1%. The highest yielding online banks that you see advertising online are paying a little bit more than that. They're paying about 3%, 3.5%, maybe 4% at best. But inflation is 6% right now. So that means you're losing real value every day, even if you're smart enough to open an online savings account. On the Max platform, our rate is now north of 5%. So we're delivering the best rates in the country on these commodity products, which are an FDIC insured savings account. And we're able to do that because the banks on our platform don't have to pay for customer acquisition. And that's really important. Everywhere, wherever you see a bank advertising, that means they're spending money trying to reach you. And that's money that they can't then give you because they had to spend it to acquire you as a customer. With Max, we decided to design a platform really for financial advisors as fiduciaries so that they could do what was best for the client. And we strip out all of that marketing expense. And that's why banks on our platform are able to pay higher rates than they otherwise would advertise to the general public.
And you're offering your real alpha, or I guess alpha is a little bit of a financial advisor's lingo, but you're offering real value without adding additional risk to the portfolio when you do that.
That's exactly right. In fact, sometimes we sort of refer to it as super alpha because it's not more return with no more risk. It's more return with less risk because often people are holding too much cash at their bank. It's not fully insured. And if you keep cash above the FDIC limit at your bank, you're basically taking on the risk of being an unsecured creditor. You're taking on the bank's risk. So we think it's really important to keep all of your funds below the FDIC insurance limit. And for people with larger balances, that often means spreading it across multiple banks. And what we've done with Max is create a platform that makes it easy to manage all of those accounts in a single interface. And you can even type in your financial advisor's email address and then share that data with your advisor so that they can have a more holistic view and really have the full picture so they can be more engaged and help you with financial planning.
Right. That's a good point. I didn't think of it that way necessarily, but more risk with, more return with less risk. I think that's something all retirees could get on board with. A quick follow up to that, and maybe it's obvious, but who benefits most from using Max? I'm assuming, of course, it would be people that have the most in kind of sitting on the sidelines that would be in cash accounts.
Yeah, that's right. The benefit is really linear, right? So if you have today's rates, if you have $100,000 in cash, you might earn an extra $5,000 a year by using our software. If you have $1 million in cash, if you're so fortunate, you might earn an extra $50,000 a year by using our software. And that's real money, right? That could be used to take your grandkids on vacation or help out with college tuition for the next generation. These are really big, meaningful things you can do that can have a multi-generational impact. Some people choose to buy excess life insurance, which is a good sort of tax efficient planning tool, but really it's found money. And the interesting thing, and the thing that got me so excited about starting the company is that if you don't do this, you're missing out, right? You're making, by not doing the best you can with your cash, you're making an active choice to lose money, right? So there are two sides to every coin, right? You could look at it as the ability to earn more, or you could look at it as loss avoidance. But it's important to be deliberate about all of your financial decisions, because if you're not, those decisions will be made for you.
You made a good point to connect it with something. I think I've had conversation with retirees where you mention you could save them or earn them some extra money, and it might be a significant amount. You might think it's $10,000 or $20,000 that someone would jump all over, and maybe it doesn't move the needle for some. But when you can tie that to some of their goals or something, I think a hot button is always grandkid related. I think people think of it a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I was just looking at my Max account earlier today when our rates went up, and there's a neat little graph that we share for all of our customers, and it shows you what you would have earned had you kept your money sort of at the national savings average versus what you've earned by using Max. And when I looked at my graph, it showed me that if I had kept my money, where it was before, over the last 8 years, I would have earned less than 1% in interest cumulatively in total. And by using Max, I've earned almost 16% in interest, right? So that's a big difference, no matter what your balances are, and it compounds over time. And, as a financial advisor, I'm sure you talk to clients all the time about the importance of compounding. And this is something, our kids are teenagers. We've drilled this into their heads that, the decisions you make early on make a really big difference because of the value of compounding. But, now that people are living older and older, I'm in my mid 40s. I went to a life expectancy calculator online and I typed in my stats, and it said that, 50% chance I'm going to live to be 98 years old. Gosh, I hope it's right. But that's now I really need to think about planning differently. And so, that compounding effect over decades makes a really big difference. And if you're a retiree and, you have limited assets, which most retirees do, then this really matters. And if you are so fortunate as to have excess that you think you might be able to leave to the next generation, all the more important to make sure that it's compounding for the next several decades, so that you can leave an even bigger legacy for the next generation and make sure that they can go to college and maybe help them out with their first home if you're so fortunate as to be able to do that. So these are the sort of, when you think about your legacy and the impact you can make, not only in your current life, maybe you say, well, I don't need an extra $5,000 a year to spend, but think about what that might mean to a grandkid who's just starting out in college, who might have the flexibility to do a special educational travel program over the summer rather than having to work. So we like to always try to think of these things in tangible terms.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that popped in my head when you mentioned that rates have recently gone up, to me, this might be obvious, and I'm sure it is to you, but some listeners might be thinking, okay, rates just recently went up. Maybe I'll wait to get started until maybe I think they're going to keep going up. So I'll wait until they go up. Well, how would you answer that?
Well, I think that's an interesting question that people have been grappling with when they're thinking about whether to buy CDs.
Right.
The nice thing about Max is these are not CDs. These are just plain vanilla FDIC insured savings accounts, which means you have same day liquidity. You're not locking your money up at all. And as rates rise, the interest rate that you earn just keeps going up. So, with Max, it keeps pace with the changing rate environment. So the best time to start using Max is last year, right? The sooner the better. And this often happens to us. People will come back to me and say, Gary, gosh, you told me about Max 2 years ago, and I don't know why I didn't do it then, but I just didn't get around to doing it, and look at what I would have earned had I done it. And I'm like, well, you can still start today, right? It's never too late.
Yeah. And inertia is a powerful force, isn't it?
Definitely.
This one may be somewhat obvious as well, but in your experience, how has Max been a part of people's retirement income strategy?
So the way that we design Max is there's actually an optional built-in cash sweep feature. So you can set it up so that it helps you keep your checking account at a constant balance from month to month. So let's say you've got, several $100,000 saved in savings, and you can tie Max to a checking account. And as you draw down the balance in that checking account, it will automatically replenish from the savings account. So often people will use Max that way. You can also set it up so that it doesn't sweep in and out of your regular checking account. And then you can be a little bit more deliberate about when you withdraw money or deposit money. But we try to provide a lot of flexibility because one thing we've learned over the last decade is that everyone manages cash differently. Everyone thinks about cash differently. And it seems like such a simple asset class. Most people don't even think of it as an asset class, but it is. But it turns out that there's actually a tremendous amount of value in cash because of the option value associated with it. And this is why Warren Buffett, famed investor Warren Buffett, loves cash. It's not because it's the highest returning asset class. It almost never is, although it was last year, but generally it's not, right? Keeping all of your money in cash is generally not a good investment strategy. But having some money in cash and on the sidelines makes it possible to take advantage of investment opportunities when other people might be fearful in selling. And there's a lot of research that shows that the biggest danger in investing is being overallocated to the point where the markets start to get choppy and you get nervous and you panic and sell. And that's usually the worst time to sell. And similarly, while everyone else is panicking, if you have extra cash on the sidelines, those are often the best times to buy. So a lot of advisors will caution against trying to time the market. I'm not suggesting that you try to perfectly time the market, but in many cases, what we hear is that simply by having that extra cash cushion, it gives people the peace of mind not to panic and sell when markets turn volatile.
I hate to interrupt this conversation, but we are going to put a pin in our chat for today, and you will have to come back to hear the conclusion of this interview with Gary Zimmerman. When we come back for part 2, Gary talks about the relationship between cash and happiness, not just the amount of cash, but where you have it and its availability. We also discuss how Gary views competition in this space, and we wrap up by exploring some of the high points and low points in Gary's journey to create MaxMyInterest. More than anything, you won't want to miss this episode's show notes, as you can take action with an opportunity to set up your own MaxMyInterest account. I've done this myself, and from start to finish, I think it took me less than 5 minutes. We've also included a link to the MaxMyInterest frequently asked questions page to help you address anything we don't cover on the show. I look forward to sharing the rest of this conversation in 2 weeks. Until then, be well and God bless.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, we would love if you took a quick moment to leave an honest review. Of course, we're shooting for 5 stars, but if you have suggestions to improve the show, we would love to hear from you too. Just click on the podcast name, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast and scroll down to ratings and review. Thanks again for your support, as this helps us reach a wider audience and help even more retirees just like you. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Lauren Sherman is a certified financial planner and co-owner of Integrity Wealth Management, an investment advisor serving retirees in search of their own healthy, wealthy, and wise retirement lifestyle.